Good afternoon, 7.2 and 7.3. This is Miss Lawson bringing you yet another week worth of dystopian goodness. I feel like the feedback's been really positive this week. I feel people are understanding what is dystopia and what makes up dystopia. If you've been following along for the last 2 weeks, you should have a better understanding. It's still a new term, so it's not a problem if you don't, but just follow along with these lessons. Let's have a little recap first. There's a few things I need to just go through with you. Let's just do a recap first, however. Do you remember there was this task? This was one of your tasks last week. You had to look at this picture and you had to answer these 8 simple questions, and what was actually going to, come out of that is that you'd end up having, the essential bare bones of the very first paragraph of your own dystopian short story, because you'd be describing the sky, describing the buildings, you'd be talking about what is missing, what do you think you can hear, what do you think you can smell, and you'd have to come up with some 5 adjectives, which was then obviously you were encouraged to use thesaurus, and some of you did some fantastic work, and I just wanted to give a shout out to these people here first. This was week 1 and 2, some work here. I've just been, because I know obviously some people are working on a week or 2 behind, and that's absolutely fine. But you are sending me your work, and it is really, really lovely to see. This person here, if you can clearly see, it says, I can see big buildings and logos floating. And if you can't see any roads, trees or cars, which is very interesting. There's another one here that I really, really loved. And again, we've got someone else's here. This was a task, before I get onto this one, this was a task where you had to read the extract, and this wonderful person here has printed off the extract, which I know that not everyone has the capacity to do, well, that's fine, but this person has, and they've actually highlighted and gone through, just as we would in class actually, with highlighter, and found really key key kind of hints that something is not quite right, and for instance, if we go back to here, the clock was striking 13. This was the same task. Now this task here, this person, apart from the spelling error, Mr., and you know who you are, this was brilliant. So in the dystopian image, I can see enormous buildings as far as the eye can see. I can also see a plethora, good for me to say, of adverts overshadowed by a polluted sky. The fact that he'd obviously mentioned the word plethora is incredible anyway, but you can see how it's all kind of beginning to form the very first paragraph. What's missing in the image is any sign of greenery or any sign of plant life, for that matter. The sky is very polluted with extremely little signs of blue, excluding the lack of blue sky because of the sunset. The buildings are very large, mostly an ugly shade of grey and black, and the only traces of colour, mostly, are the adverts placed on or around the buildings. And you remember that person before had mentioned the logos of the buildings, which is a really lovely word and terminology, logos. I have no idea where the dystopian city could have been located. However, judging by the simple buildings and holographic adverts, this image could well become a reality in about 30 to 70 years. Which is lovely. If I was in the image, I would probably hear lots of droning from machinery and coughing because of pollution. And if I was there, I would also smell a lot of fossil fuel, such as coal. When I look at the image, I strangely feel reassured because of the very low likelihood of humanity getting to that point, and I've now cut it off for the way that they've sent it to me. This was beautifully done, and so if you imagine now, there was a section where he had to give 5 adjectives. If you have put that in there with those questions, those answers that he's put together, you would have kind of the fundamental basics of the beginning of a short story. Someone else, this is from week 1 again, definitions that we had to look up, which is really, I'm just really proud of every single one of you who is doing your best, accessing the learning as best as you can, sending it to me, and lots of you are getting involved on Teams, which is the first thing that I wanted to just mention. If you're watching this on the day that it's been set, which is Monday, I'm hosting a Q&A for each class. One starts at 11, one starts at 12. Where you can just come along onto Teams and join the call that I'm going to be hosting. Now, there's no work. There's nothing to be required from you. It's optional. You're not going to get told off if you can't be there. For instance, perhaps you've planned a family walk, or perhaps you're probably just eating your lunch, and that's absolutely fine. You're not going to get into trouble. It's just an opportunity to come and say hello, come and speak to me face to face. and to ask any questions you might have or anything kind of you don't actually understand. Perhaps even if you want to ask some questions, we can do that. We can just catch up and just to say hi, because I know a lot of you are feeling quite stranded and quite alone. So this is a perfect opportunity for us all to kind of say hello. There are some rules in terms of how you're going to have your face on the camera, but I've explained everything onto Teams. So head over to Teams. It's on the calendar there. You'll be able to just click on it and take part. Right, let's get on with today's lesson. Strangely, I've gone to do now task 5 minutes into the lesson, so let's get cracking. Okay, so your do now task. Who remembers these? It's a Freya model, and we haven't done these for absolutely ages since we broke up from school. It's really important though that we keep these up because they're so useful, and most of you really like doing these. So my Freya models tend to have the 3 sections. This has got 4, but there is an option for you to draw a picture in the 4th one. So you put the definition here, so you're going to use a dictionary. And then you're going to give me an example, and then you're going to see if you can find a non-example, okay? Always tricky to find the non-example. So the non-example is the opposite, it's the antithesis, it's the antonym of the example, okay? So maybe you might need to even just type that into Google if you can, or maybe have something clearly clear in your head. So your word is warning. It's the advance notice of something, and there is a reason why I've chosen that word specifically when it comes to dystopia. So pause this video, take 5 minutes just to see what you can come up with. I'm going to come up with a few other answers, but not for your examples or your non-examples, so you're going to have to do that by yourselves. Okay, so here I have managed to find the synonyms, or the words with the similar meaning for the word warning. So let's read these through together. Notice, advance notice, a word of warning, forewarning, alert, hint, signal, sign, alarm bells, a tip-off, notify, and a prize. There's some really fantastic words here, but there is one word that's more crucial than any other. So a forewarning. If you have the word for in front of the word in terms of the prefix, it means it's to do with something that's, beforehand. Okay, so you think of the word before, there we go. Now that's a warning that it basically comes before something. And there is a term that writers will know and that you're going to learn today. And it's similar to forewarning, is foreshadowing. So, like I said, it means come before in time or before a place. If you think in art, you might have to draw a foreground before. So, foreshadowing is a literary device in which a writer gives an advance hint or warning of what is to come later in the story. Foreshadowing often appears at the beginning of a story. So, there we go, beginning part. Or a chapter, and helps the reader develop expectations about the coming events in the story. There are various ways to create foreshadowing. So like I said, when we're going to get to that lovely, glorious part of this scheme of work where you get to write your own story, there's going to be ways that you can embed that within your very first paragraph, and you can give the audience a clue that something is going to happen. Foreshadowing in fiction creates atmosphere of suspense in a story, so the readers are interested to know more. You can create a happy or sombre or an ominous tone by foreshadowing, and it's usually quite obvious in dystopia. It's a great show, don't tell tool when you write your own stories. Remember, we've talked about that, and I'm sure you've heard that term to death in primary school. Show, don't tell. We don't want to be so obvious with our writing. We don't want to say he stepped down the stairs. We want to describe it in a really beautiful and magical way. Now, we're going to read 2 extracts together. And we can actually see, if we're reading through it, that there's going to be any kind of hints or warnings that there's something not quite right. Your task last week, when you were looking at that extract of 1984, you had to find things that weren't quite right. The clock striking 13, for instance, and that's really essentially what we're talking about here. So what we need to do is have a read through these 2 extracts. I'm going to put my glasses on, and let's read these together. Okay, so the first one is from a book called Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. It's probably not as well known as 1984 or The Hunger Games, but let's read it through together and we can see what the task is going to be for today's lesson. Our trailer was near the northern edge of the stacks, which ran up to a crumbling highway overpass. From my vantage point at the laundry room window, I could see a thin stream of electric vehicles crawling along the cracked asphalt, carrying goods and workers into the city. As I stared out at the grim skyline, a bright sliver of the sun peeked over the horizon. Watching it rise, I performed a mental ritual. Whenever I saw the sun, I reminded myself I was looking at a star, one of over 100 billion stars in our galaxy. A galaxy that was just one of billions of other galaxies in the observable universe. This helped me keep things in perspective. I started doing it after watching a science program from the early 80s called Cosmos. I slipped out of the window as quietly as possible and, clutching the bottom of the window frame, slid down the cold surface of the trailer's metal siding. The steel platform on which the trailer rested was only slightly wider and longer than the trailer itself, leaving a ledge about 1.5 feet wide all the way round. I carefully lowered myself until the feet rested on this ledge and then reached up to close the window behind me. I grabbed hold of a rope I'd strung there at waist level to serve as a handhold and began to sidestep along the ledge as the corner of the platform. From there, I was able to descend the ladder-like frame of the scaffolding. I almost took this route when leaving or returning to my aunt's trailer. A rickety metal staircase was bolted to the side of the stack, but it shook and knocked against the scaffolding, so I couldn't use it without announcing my presence. Bad news. In the stacks, it was best to avoid being heard or seen whenever possible. There was often dangerous and desperate people about. When I reached the bottom level, I jumped off the scaffold and dropped the floor with a few remaining feet to the ground. My rubber boots crunched into the slush and frozen mud. It was still pretty dark down here, so I took out my flashlight and headed east, weaving my way through the dark maze, doing my best to remain unseen while being careful to avoid tripping over a shopping cart, engine block, or one of the other pieces of junk littering the narrow alleys between the stacks. I rarely saw anyone out at this time of the morning. The commuter shuttles ran only a few times a day, so the residents lucky enough to have a job would already be waiting at the bus stop by the highway. Most of them worked as day labourers in the giant factory farms that surrounded the city. Okay, so within this little extract of the book, we are told about a person. We don't actually know male or female at this section, and it's actually irrelevant for this moment. What we are looking at with this extract is the setting. Okay, so where it's been set. We know from this extract some really good and useful piece of information. We know the type of weather there is, we know the time of day, we know what kind of place it is. And I'm not going to give you too many answers to this because there is a task in a second that you're going to have a look and analyse. But if I'm going to give you an example, we've got the words rickety metal staircase was bolted to the side of the stack. Now, I think stack here means like a block of flats or places where people live. Maybe if you've read the book, you might know that that's already true. It's because it's mentioned quite a few times through. So you can imagine just the mere word of stack as where someone lives isn't particularly nice, is it? We know that it's quite industrial. We know that there are some scary people around. We know things are, like I said, rickety, got often dangerous and desperate. Got that lovely alliteration. And, you know, kind of the repetition of the duh gives us that sense of our heart, perhaps, duh gives us that scare and that fear. We've got a lovely use of punctuation as well here, which creates added suspense. But overall, when you're reading this, you need to be thinking about the type of place where this is being set. Now, there is a second extract. Let's have a read through this one. And this is The Hunger Games. I don't really know why this has gone over to one side, because that doesn't really help, does it? Right, that's a bit better. Right, so this is from The Hunger Games, and when I was looking at people's choices of books and films that they were trying to think about, you know, I was asking, have you read anything or watched anything that's dystopian by nature? Lots of you said The Hunger Games. Most of you have seen it or at least know about it. So this is an extract from this. So that again, we're looking at the setting. We're not necessarily worrying about what's going to happen in the future, but let's just look at the description. Our house is almost at the edge of the scene. I only have to pass a few gates to reach the scruffy field called the meadow. Separating the meadow from the woods, in fact enclosing all of District 12, is a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire loops. In theory, it's supposed to be electrified 24 hours a day as a deterrent to the predators that live in the woods. Pack of wild dogs, lone cougars, bears that used to threaten our streets. But since we're lucky to get 2 or 3 hours of electricity in the evenings, it's usually safe to touch. And even so, I always take a moment to listen carefully for the hum that means the fence is live. Right now, it's silent as a stone. Concealed by a clump of bushes, I flatten out on my belly and slide under a metre-long stretch that's been loose for years. There are several other weak spots in the fence, but this one is so close to home I almost entered the woods here. As soon as I'm in the trees, I retrieve a bow and sheath of arrows from a hollow log. Electrified or not, the fence has been successful at keeping the flesh-eaters out of District 12. Inside the woods, they roam freely, and they are added concerns like venomous snakes, rabid animals, and no real paths to follow. But there's also food if you know how to find it. My father knew, and he taught me some ways before he was blown to bits in a mine explosion. There was nothing left of him to bury. I was 11 then. 5 years later, I still wake up screaming for him to run. In the woods waits the only person with whom I can be myself, Gail. I can feel the muscles in my face relaxing, my pace quickening as I climb the hills to our place. A rock ledge overlooking a valley, a thicket of berry bushes protect it from unwanted eyes. The sight of him waiting there brings on a smile. Gail says I never smile, except in the woods. So again, like I said before in the previous extract, we're looking at the area. Now we know that it's dangerous. The person's mentioned wild animals. And it says it used to threaten our streets. However, it does also mention flesh eaters out of District 12. Again, I get the impression it's quite a barren, if not industrial, place. We've got one scruffy field called the meadow, and there's some trees. But it's the place. It's called a scene. Again, it's a bit like the stack. It's not necessarily the nicest of words. And the fact that it's called District 12 gives us the impression that it perhaps is futuristic of some description. We've got the idea of an electric fence, which is live, which could obviously, electrify people to go in and out. We've got, again, some lovely, beautiful alliteration here, silent as a stone, that beautiful sibilance. And you're having to sneak out, and right at the end, the protagonist has said that the only time that they smile is when they're actually out of that situation here and into the woods, when they've clearly got a friend. We've got this really sad story about the person's father dying and a mine explosion. So again, that gives us the impression that something definitely is amiss, really. Something's not quite right. It doesn't sound particularly like Haverhill. Thank goodness. Now, I'm going to put this PowerPoint and those 2 extracts onto Teams for you and to Go for School, so that you can perhaps have a look at it, freeze frame them onto your screen and just make notes. Now, if you have got a printer at home, you're one of the lucky ones like that previous person, then print them off and highlight them, because what you are needing to do is to make a chart just the same as this, and you're going to find similarities and you're going to give me the evidence. I have briefly touched upon alliteration, but there are some other ways that, that they have created tension in those 2 settings. Now, what do I mean by setting? Well, the choice of setting is extremely important in a dystopian novel. Remember, a dystopia is a place where normal life is different to how we know it. Okay, like I said, doesn't sound like Haverhill, even on a most terrible Friday of evenings. Post-apocalyptic, perhaps after a nuclear war or a worldwide pandemic of disease, an extreme famine or starvation, an alien invasion, a society where the government or single leader has total control. A writer's choice of setting can almost act as another character in a dystopian novel, and it helps create expectation or impression for the reader of what might happen to the protagonist, or helps them to sympathise with the character's suffering. You're going to look at some settings, but again, that links in with the idea that we get given warnings as readers, as the audience, because the writers clearly put things into those 2 extracts. It's not just said, it was cold, I went for a walk. Okay, they've really taken the time to set the scene, to concentrate the setting, which then gives us that really lovely hint that, you know, this is not a normal way of life. This is something different. And that's the whole idea of dystopia. It's something different to our normal life, our normality. So you are going to write this chart for me. Now, let's just explain it simply for you so you don't get confused. And actually, there's not too many other things you can do apart from just follow this along. I'm asking for 5 similarities, and you can choose. Now, these have got question marks at the end. I've given you one here, as they both present the setting as dangerous. So, and I've given the evidence. So, quote 1 would be packs of wild dogs, lone cougars, and bears. And then quote 1 for Ready Player One would be mound of old cars and trucks piled haphazardly. So that's my evidence. So remember your what, how, why. This is very similar. So what and then how. I'm not asking for why though yet. Number 2, the settings are isolated. What clues can you find that says that they're isolated? This one here, I've not put a question mark in, so you can do that one. But then 3, 4 and 5, what other techniques can you find? And I've highlighted alliteration, I'll discuss that with you. I've also talked about the use of punctuation. There's the use of short sentences to create tension. Perhaps you could find some personification. Perhaps you could find some more examples of assonance or sibilants if you want to go back onto your books and see what you can come up to. Now, there are some differences. There aren't many. Okay, I would be very amazed, and this is a challenge, if any of you would like to find at least one difference between the two, I will give you an R2. I'm really interested to see what you could come up with in terms of differences. Obviously, the books are different, okay, they are different, but again, they're very similar because they're both dystopian. There's one protagonist in each of them, and they're escaping and going out somewhere where they shouldn't do. So lots of similarities there. So what are you going to do with your information once you've gathered it? So once you've got your ruler, perhaps you remember to use the edge of your book as a ruler like you can do to make sure it's nice and neat. What are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to answer this question. Now, this question, I'm really interested for you to be able to write for me. So you're going to be doing our task, then you're going to have a chart, and this is your 3rd and final task for me. I want you to compare the 2 settings with this information that you have here. So if you do all this work here, this part's going to be really easy. So you're going to be able to write just 2 paragraphs, and I'll even accept one, guys, if you just want to do 1 paragraph. I've put a list of sentence starters here, so we can use similarly, in the same way, likewise, in comparison, the author creates, the author have both used, there is a sense of, both protagonists are. In both extracts we can see. They're really lovely ways of you to kind of start your sentences and your paragraphs. And again, here we have some keywords that you could use, and again, some more sentence starters. Okay. With this chart, you're going to have all the information and your evidence, and you're just going to talk about them. So don't sit there and think, oh goodness gracious, I really can't write 2 paragraphs. That just sounds so confusing. Take it step by step. Do the chart first. Then go and look at my sentence starters and just merely write about those two extracts. That's all you're doing. And I'm giving you all the sentence starters. It should be nice and simple. But all in all, not too much of a hard task this week. Remember, I am going to do the Q&A that's over on Teams on Monday. If you're watching this on the day that this video has gone up, then it'll be today. And secondly, I am going to do a further reading. Do you remember I was reading a book? I did. I think I called my video "Let's Read Together" or something similar. I'm going to do that every week, just we can just read together because it just gets us into good practice, and it is obviously linked to Dystopia. Any questions? Please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'm here all the time if you need any help. Remember, do your chart, write 2 paragraphs about the 2 extracts, and you're done. Have a lovely week, and yeah, I'll see you next week.